are about to take part in a time-traveling road trip through pop culture. A road trip with a clear destination and many stops along the way. This is but one act of one chapter of the serialized journey.
So if any of you feel that you do not care to subject your nerves to such a strain, now is your chance to, well, we've warned you.
Mom, my nuts.
When we last left off, we took a deep dive into the fractured space-time continuum of Back to the Future and took the time to audit some Castleton classes courtesy of Time Chasers. This week, we conclude our deep dive into MST3K's 8th season with public access shenanigans, the most eminently quotable film ever made, a salute to the late great Raul Julia, and a reminder to never show clips of a good movie in the middle of your crappy one. As always, I am Ryan Rodriguez, and you were stuck with the Coolness Chronicles Season 1, The History and Legacy of Mystery Science Theater 3000. Chapter 11, Sci-Fi Odyssey, Act 10, The Justifiable Hatred of Anteaters. The Public Broadcasting Service, PBS, has been a free source of educational and cultured entertainment since its incorporation in 1969. 51 years of BBC collaboration and imported British classics like Monty Python's Flying Circus, Mr. Bean, and Fawlty Towers. 51 years of considerate and edifying commercial-free children's television like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, Sesame Street, Big Blue Marble, The Electric Company, Zoom, and Reading Rainbow. 51 years of Bob Ross, opera, ballet, Downton Abbey, Doctor Who, Masterpiece Theater, American Masters, Frontline, Austin City Limits, National Geographic, POV, NewsHour, Independent Lens, and Nova. But though PBS is responsible for the smartening of many an average American, my family and myself included, not every contribution they've made to society has been positive. Even series like American Playhouse, one of their key anthology series, which ran from 1981 to 1992, was bound to have some off weeks. Case in point, a TV movie from that show's third season, one of the very few adaptations of science fiction short story author John Barley's work, 1983's Overdrawn at the Memory Bank.
They monkeyed around with his mind.
Nothing to worry about.
Then they lost his body.
Either I'm nuts or you are.
Now he's trapped inside a supercomputer
We're nothing more than a byte in a giant computer.
where fantasies are virtual reality.
We will terminate him.
Raul Julia, part machine, all man.
I guess I made some waves.
Overdrawn at the Memory Bank. Tomorrow at 3 p.m., 12 Pacific on the Sci-Fi Channel.
Overdrawn at the Memory Bank was helmed by Canadian television director Douglas Williams, who worked steadily throughout the 80s on series like Captain Power and the Soldiers of the Future, the Jim Henson HBO classic Fraggle Rock, and a Mr. T show I'd never heard of, T&T. He apparently sat out the entirety of the 90s, or at least went the entire decade without receiving credit, before stepping back into the fray with the BBC Glasgow puppet show Captain Abercrombie, which he also wrote and produced, and rounded out his resume with a TV movie with the intriguing title Hitler's Canadians. The teleplay was provided by playwright Corinne Jacker, who spent the first years of the decade as the head writer of daytime soap opera Another World, and after Overdrawn, did not work in the industry again. Can't say I blame her. Most MST3K experiments have possessed significant star power. Joe Don Baker, Ben Murphy, Richard Keel, Tor Johnson, Robert Ginty, Neil Connery, Kathy Ireland, Paul Anka, John Agar, Joe Estevez, and of course, El Santo. But to be serious, I'm hard-pressed to think of an episode with a more dynamic lead than Raul Julia.
A sportsman's paradise, and it's called Puerto Rico. It's a morning ride and an afternoon drive. It's the catch of the day and the thrill of a lifetime. It's tennis aces, deep sea races, underwater treasures, and windswept pleasures. But sometimes my favorite sport is doing nothing at all.
Born in San Juan, Puerto Rico in 1940, Julia was inspired to become an actor by Errol Flynn and Michael Curtiz's sublime The Adventures of Robin Hood, and by his college years was organizing multiple productions based on the works of William Shakespeare. In his mid-20s, he emigrated to Manhattan and began taking acting lessons from Wynn Hanman, the artistic director of the American Place Theater and subject of the tremendous Netflix documentary It Takes a Lunatic. 4 years into his new residence, Julia made his Broadway debut and balanced that work with 2 television gigs, including a recurring role as Raphael the Fix-It Man on the seminal PBS series Sesame Street.
I've got 2 hands. 1, 2.
In Spanish, you would say, yo tengo dos manos. Una y dos.
Mm-hmm. Well, what about this one? I've got 2 ears. 1, 2.
Right. In Spanish, you would say, yo tengo dos oídos. Uno y dos.
In the early 1970s, he began his film career in earnest, with 3 roles in 1971 alone, including a bit part in The Panic at Needle Park. The next year, he earned his first Tony Award nomination for Two Gentlemen of Verona, returned to Shakespeare but on a much larger scale, with meaty roles in King Lear and As You Like It, and even turned up on The Bob Newhart Show.
Yes, sir. Could I help you, please?
Yeah, you sure could. You have her phone number?
Well, yes, I do. And so does the man behind that door, her husband.
Ah, you're married, huh? It's just as well I would have broke your heart. What are you doing after work?
Emily, can you believe the nerve of this guy? Nothing.
By the end of the decade, he had earned 3 more Tony nominations for Where's Charlie, Threepenny Opera, and 9, respectively. The 80s brought a full-blown film career, with roles in the disastrous Francis Ford Coppola musical One from the Heart, and a Golden Globe nomination for his outstanding role as a leftist revolutionary political prisoner in Hector Barbenco's Kiss of the Spider-Woman. That breakthrough was followed with turns in Compromising Positions, Sidney Lumet's The Morning After, The Penitent, and the title role in Romero about human rights advocate Archbishop Oscar Romero. The 90s were equally prosperous, as Harrison Ford's lawyer who always keeps a trump card up his sleeve in Ellen J. Pakula's Presumed Innocent, an uncredited appearance as the Paul Henreid in Casablanca analog in Havana, which we discussed back in Chapter 9, and the lead role in Barry Sonnenfeld's surprise blockbuster adaptation of The Addams Family, which we'll discuss in the next chapter for a discussion on Jackie Coogan and the Space Children. Tragically, around this time, Julia was diagnosed with stomach cancer, for which he underwent surgery. While it was initially successful, his subsequent screen work was profoundly affected. He appeared gaunt and diminished, which is on uncomfortable display in his final film role as the antagonist in the dreadful film adaptation of the Street Fighter video game, a new RiffTrax classic.
It was 20 years ago. You hadn't promoted yourself to general yet. You were just a petty drug lord. You and your gang of murderers gathered your small ounce of courage to raid across the border for food, weapons, slave labor. My father was the village magistrate. A simple man with a simple code, justice. He gathered the few people that he could to stand against you. You and your bullies were driven back by farmers with pitchforks. My father saved his village at the cost of his own life. You had him shot as you ran away. A hero. At 1,000 paces.
I'm sorry. I don't remember any of it.
You don't remember?
For you, the day bison graced your village was the most important day of your life. But for me, it was Tuesday.
On October 16, 1994, he was rushed to the hospital with abdominal pain and late in the evening suffered a stroke. On October 20th, he fell into a coma, and on the 24th, he was dead. We lost one of our most magnetic screen presences at the age of 54. 3 years later, Best Brains managed to license Overdrawn at the Memory Bank for their 8th season finale, the first for Sci-Fi Channel, and they faced a dilemma. How do you ridicule a movie when its justifiably beloved star, who was in practically every scene, by the way, died a recent unjust death? It's a high-wire tightrope act. You can't ignore his presence, but you can't dump on him, nor would you want to. They had run into a similar situation back in Season 6 when riffing Bloodlust, barely a few years after the death of Robert Reed, for whom they decided to steer clear of jokes altogether, but Reed was only a supporting player in that film. Raul Julia is in every single scene in Overdrawn at the Memory Bank. So how did it turn out? Quite well, actually. But before we dive into it, some context is necessary, as the experiment hinges on the viewer's familiarity with a particular film, arguably the most eminently quotable film of all time. Let's go back to 1942 and discuss Michael Curtiz's Casablanca. The last 5 decades have given major credence to the so-called auteur theory, which hypothesizes that the director of a film is the author of the work, even more so than the literal author, infusing a production with his or her personal style, and that this approach to directing is the most artistically satisfying approach. While I agree that the director is an invaluable collaborator and that many of the greatest films ever made benefit greatly from a driving creative vision, if I were to ever counter this theory, the ace up my sleeve would be Michael Curtiz. When the film industry began, directors were, for the most part, indentured servants in the studio system. Instead of developing projects from scratch, directors received assignments. The closest thing to this in the modern parlance of film would be Marvel Studios, whose projects are brewed in-house, with directors auditioning for the opportunity to execute the project. If you were a director at this time, you had to be fucking versatile. Your job wasn't to enforce your own stamp, your job was to get your pages, stage and block, rehearse your actors, get everything in the can, and await your next job. You were not allowed genre preferences or any related considerations. And the king of this machine was Michael Curtiz. If the name doesn't sound familiar, that's perfectly understandable. He never sought nor received a possessory credit. Such a notion was hardly realistic when completing 3 movies in a calendar year and considering it a slow 12 months. And he imposed no unifying personality from project to project. But you know his work intimately. Allow me to rattle off just a few titles. The Charge of the Light Brigade, Captain Blood, The Adventures of Robin Hood, Angels with Dirty Faces, The Private Lives of Elizabeth and Essex, The Seahawk, Yankee Doodle Dandy, Mildred Pierce, Casablanca. That is merely a 10-year stretch from 1936 to 1946, and only 1/3 of the work he produced during that time. The connections you could possibly draw between those disparate films would be nebulous, and I honestly feel that this is as important an achievement as directing only 2 films with a distinctive, singular style. Curtiz was arguably, in terms of execution, the most versatile director of all time, and the high watermark of his entire career was a war-torn romantic drama starring the iconic Humphrey Bogart, the stunning Ingrid Bergman, and possibly my favorite supporting MVP ever, Claude Rains, Casablanca.
Casablanca, city of hope and despair, located in French Morocco in North Africa. The meeting place of adventurers, fugitives, criminals, refugees lured into this danger-swept oasis by the hope of escape to the Americas. But they're all trapped, for there is no escape. Against this fascinating background is woven the story of an imperishable love and the enthralling saga of 6 desperate people, each in Casablanca to keep an appointment with destiny.
I was willing to shoot Captain Reno, and I'm willing to shoot you. All right, Major, you asked for it.
how much I still love you.
I know a good deal more about you than you suspect. I know, for instance, that you're in love with a woman. It's perhaps a strange circumstance that we both should love the same woman.
What do you want for Sam?
Don't buy and sell human beings.
That's too bad. That's Casablanca's leading commodity.
You can ask any price you want, but you must give me those letters.
That's all right.
I tried to reason with you. I tried it. Now I want those letters.
Bogart plays Rick Blaine, a disillusioned American expat and owner of a casino/nightclub in Nazi-occupied French Morocco.
Is he in custody?
Oh, there's no hurry. Tonight he'll be at Rick's. Everybody comes to Rick's.
Though Rick puts up a front of jaded apathy, he has a political past, and his establishment is considered a neutral zone, catering to everyone from people looking to get out to the people looking to take those desperate souls for everything they have, and every morally ambiguous or morally repugnant man in between. Rick's second most meaningful relationship, and a love-hate one at that, is with the local prefect of police, Claude Rains' Captain Louis Renault, with whom he shares a mutual distrust. Rick's ironclad facade of hard-ass detachment weakens after the arrival of Ingrid Bergman's Ilsa Lund, the woman with whom he fell madly in love with the year before, and also the woman who abandoned him without warning. What Rick didn't know is that Ilsa was married during the affair, and her husband, a leader of the Czech resistance, was imprisoned in a concentration camp, believed to be dead after an escape attempt. And now, with Ilsa back in Rick's orbit and her husband in tow, it's clear that the spark between them hasn't dissipated. He must confront his wounded ego and either decide to throw away the life he's built in Casablanca in order to abscond with her, or provide her and her husband a means for escape, allowing the two freedom fighters to help turn the tide of war. After rewatching Casablanca for the 10th time for this podcast, counting numerous listens to Roger Ebert's fantastic audio commentary, I had to take stock of my note-taking process, which is usually comprehensive and incessant. Even if I don't have much to say about a film, I tend to fill out, on average, half a page of observations. This viewing resulted in 5 lines. Not because it doesn't warrant analysis, but because at a certain point I always stop thinking about the mechanics and minutiae and just give in to the magic wholeheartedly. It's almost impossible to comprehend that for Warner Brothers in 1942, this was just another assembly line programmer, working from a screenplay that was only half written at the start of filming and had its world premiere only 6 months after the first day of principal photography. Michael Curtiz brings a deft, light touch to the proceedings, but never gives you a millisecond to process the story's inherent reliance on plot contrivances. The performances are top-notch, the production atmospheric, despite being mostly shot on recycled sets, the efficiency and structure impeccable. It's a 4-quadrant crowd pleaser that somehow transcends time and space as an evergreen tribute to the fundamental power of cinema to unify anyone with a pulse and a sense of romance. And its dialogue has been emulated, honored, and flat-out ripped off since the year it was released, and will continue to be as long as filmmakers have an even cursory need for characters to demonstrate personality and wit through verbal communication.
I've often speculated on why you don't return to America. Did you abscond with the church funds? Did you run off with the senator's wife? I like to think that you killed a man. It's the romantic in me.
It's a combination of all three.
And what in heaven's name brought you to Casablanca?
My health. I came to Casablanca for the waters.
The waters? What waters? We're in the desert.
I was misinformed.
If you've never seen Casablanca by now, you might want to do so before watching Overdrawn at the Memory Bank, as the experiment at the center of it trades exclusively on the knowledge of its basic mechanics. But you should also watch it because it's a building block of film appreciation, a key step in understanding the importance of the legacy of mainstream cinema and the relevance of the art of that time. It's a miracle, and it's always waiting for you, wherever or whenever you are. On to our feature presentation. And by feature presentation, I mean TV movie photographed on videotape to incorporate rudimentary computer graphics inside a modernist Canadian shopping mall. Our hero, a word of obligation, not description, is Aram Fingal. Yes, You heard me right. Aram Fingal.
Get back to work, Fingal.
You make me tingle, Fingal. Fingal, are you single? Give me a jingle.
Good one.
Fingal is a lowly programmer for a world power corporation called Novacore, not to be confused with GenCore, which controls practically every aspect of society in a colorless dystopia, a fact that we learn through a vivid opening credit sequence with dynamic visuals reminiscent of the Home Shopping Network. We also get an introduction to our insidious antagonist, the Baron Harkonnen-esque chairman of Novacorp, a rotund adult cherub with permanent pre-digestion spittle in the corner of his mouth, and I assume he has a name, but he's mostly only referred to as the Fat Man.
Now the news.
That's the New York Public TV station. What, did Pearl accidentally send us McNeil Lehrer report?
Oh, no, you think Mark Russell's gonna be in this?
No.
Wanda Cannon, now that's a porno name if I ever heard one. Well, not that I've ever heard one.
Huh.
I don't subscribe to lots of publications or anything.
Huh.
As of this business day,
Wow, TV's Frank.
Wow, Frank, he's really come up in the world.
Frank.
by 4%. Let Lexicorp deal with that. We will win.
Well, he's kind of a Dickensian character of the future sort of thing.
And communication is civilization.
Did I imagine it, Mike, or did a chubby angel with gin blossoms just visit us?
It's details like these that age science fiction movies the most drastically, because the idea of life-snuffing conglomerates with intentions of world domination is absolutely absurd. Isn't that right?
That's right, Ryan.
Fingal seeks to escape the soul-crushing drudgery of his existence through an outlawed medium, movies on his computer screen, referred to in this film as cinemas. Because another hallmark of low-reaching sci-fi is swapping out perfectly functional vocabulary for euphemisms.
Fingal's worries about Doppling were a little out of date. In the 5 years I'd worked at Nirvana Village, nothing had ever gone wrong. But of course, almost everyone doppled voluntarily. Fingal was my first compulsory doppel.
I didn't want to bungle or bobble to Fingal doppel.
Fingal's particular cinema of choice is Casablanca, and you know your reality is really hopeless when you mentally retreat into the emotionally rewarding fantasy of war-torn French Morocco that is being menaced by Nazis. Because cinemas are frowned upon in the wonderful world of computer programming, Fingal's vicarious fantasies are penalized through company-mandated rehabilitation. Rehabilitation in this case means doppling.
Okay, so it's my first doppel.
I've only dabbled in doppels.
Sit down, Mr. Fingal.
You need to tinkle, Fingal?
Nothing to worry about.
How about some Pringles, Fingal?
Here it is. The interface and identity
Blah, 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 blah,
HX254
techno
while they were
bolt,
cloning a subject.
Doppling is a process that involves removing the top of one's head with no messy aftermath and transferring their brain into a computer.
Is that you, Fester?
You know, with this digital technology, the suckiness comes through with great clarity.
Absolutely.
What happened?
Probably ate too many Flavor Fives.
In the computer, that person's consciousness is placed into digital avatars, which need not necessarily be human. In Fingal's case, he's being inserted into the mind of a drunk baboon.
I love you guys, and now we're gonna graduate. I'm never gonna see you guys again, man.
I feel awful.
Daisy still managing?
Sort of.
How about Gatsby?
She found the maruba trees.
Daisy, don't move. I'll be sick.
She's vomiting blood.
I don't know. It's just, I don't know.
The days of Maruba fruit and roses.
But it could be worse, as Fingal makes it very clear that he's contemptuous of another species that every sentient life form can agree is inferior. But during this unholy process of injecting brains into computer databases, something, somehow, goes horribly wrong.
At least I'm not an anteater.
This movie just hates anteaters.
Unbelievable.
Because in a universe where this technology is not only possible but taken for granted, children in primary school are allowed to tour the Doppling Center without supervision.
What's this? A routing tag. Each color has a different destination. Green for the slumber room, yellow for organ transplant, and so on.
And blue, like this?
Well, that's rather unusual. We can talk about it later.
Is it sexy?
We'll talk about it later. Now come along. The class is waiting in the Doppling room.
No. The littlest sexual deviant. Kill him.
Some random kid sees that Fingal is tagged with color-coded fabric and switches his tagging with another person's body, only this other person is being prepared for sex reassignment surgery. Because the facility is also staffed with eccentric incompetents, his body is promptly misplaced.
Sudden increases in energy flow can totally erase the technician's identity.
We plugged Watson in to monitor. What happened? I wouldn't have done it if I'd realized the awful danger he was in. Watson was tired, but still maintaining contact.
Now that Fingal's mind is stuck in the NovaCorp database, his brainwaves are bouncing around in the same mainframe that the corporation uses to regulate everything from the financial industry to the weather. Don't ask me how, I don't get it, don't care. When news of Fingal's out-of-body experience is broadcast worldwide, because, sure, NovaCorp stock crashes, which gets the attention of the chairman.
Good of you to spare me the time, Mr. Fingal. I will be brief. Powers that be want you to know that they've discovered what happened to your body.
They found me?
I discovered that one of the children who observed your doppling played a little joke on you. He switched the tag from your body to another body.
Where am I?
The chairman assigns the Fingal flub to computer controller Apollonia James. Yes, another completely reasonable, believable name. Apollonia must locate Fingal's body before his digitally backed up mind deteriorates and prevent his essence from corrupting the NovaCorp mainframe. Though she initially toes the company line, she quickly develops Fingal feelings, and the most digital romance since the movie Her begins to blossom.
No. Shall we go back to my place and make love?
This is sexual harassment, and I'm gonna take it.
Whoa. Look familiar, Mike? Probably not.
Hey.
Not for you.
Oh, I thought you'd never ask. Big boy.
Well, actually, size doesn't matter, boy.
With Apollonia's assistance, Fingal's mind somehow goes full holodeck and conjures a construct inspired by Casablanca.
Da-dum, da-da-da, die. Da-dum, da-da-da, crap.
Da-da-da-da-da, suck. Da-da-da, go away. Da-da, end.
He is placed in a simulation of Rick's Cafe American and encounters a cut-rate Peter Lorre impersonator, a villainous doppelganger of Sidney Greenstreet's character whose mannerisms and peculiarities mirror that of the chairman, Apollonia as Ilsa, and a copy of himself who mimics the jaded, world-weary characteristics of Humphrey Bogart. This includes developing a potty mouth.
I'm just trying to save my ass, and right now I'm having a damn hard time of it.
He said ass.
Listen, I'm requesting program access.
I'm requesting movie jump up my butt.
Because time works differently between the computer realm and tangible reality, Fingal quickly becomes disillusioned with his immersive virtual reality experience and decides to commit cyber terrorism and take the fight to NovaCorp and the chairman. He targets the corporation's finances, which leads to a climactic showdown with the chairman/Fat Man's avatar.
Fingal,
Draw me some butter.
you are being terminated
With extreme pork chops.
Hey, on over to Rick.
Fingal is finally reunited with his body and all of his man parts, for what that's worth, and the digital backup of his mind takes complete control of the NovaCorp servers, becoming the analog, no pun intended, of Neo from the Matrix, the titular Lawnmower Man, and the Tron Master Control program all combined. We are treated to this shift in omnipotence through watching Raul Julia standing motionless, arms outstretched in front of a green screen, composited into shots of incomprehensible digital noise.
Vertigo to hell. I love you this much.
I don't care for you.
But I'm starting the transfer.
By this point, the patience inside the Mystery Science Theater has eroded considerably, with Crow being the most on edge.
Let's try escalate access.
Yeah, let's try that. Yeah.
Phase 2.
Fingal quickly settles after ascending to godhood, sentences the human version of the chairman to a month of doppling rehab as a goddamn hideous anteater, deletes all files of himself and Apollonia from the system, taking on new identities as Rick and Ilsa respectively, and adjusts the financial systems to give every lower NovaCorp employee bonuses and, most importantly, stock options.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have some great news. Our board of directors has agreed to the acquisition of NCT Software by Oracle Corporation for $1 billion. Brilliant. You guys have worked hard and you've all earned your stock option. Congratulations.
He could use his powers to destroy the system altogether and build a new, better one, but then we would be robbed of a sequel. Instead, the young lovers vow to keep fighting the system and walk off into the NovaCorp-controlled sunset. And they all, and by all I mean those two people, live happily ever after with generous stock options as some adorably chintzy synthesized music plays us out.
Ah, well, never mind.
And now the news. That was the news.
You know, if I was going to scroll up a cinema, I'd scroll up, I don't know, maybe Dirty Dingus McGee.
Yeah, you don't see that enough, do you?
No.
The film, or video in this case, presents one of the easiest roads to savage Mystery Science Theater mockery that plagues many filmmakers understandably lacking presence of mind.
Man, never show a good movie in the middle of your crappy movie.
It's the Godfather reference in Blade 2 scenario, and even that is a much better movie.
You know, Whistler, there's an old saying. Keep your friends close. Keep your enemies closer.
Nothing highlights your poorly written screenplay or poorly put together film worse than this. And speaking of referencing above your station, if the second half of the film sounds at all familiar, even if you were fortunate enough to avoid watching Overdrawn at the memory bank, you are not alone.
Could Woody Allen bring a lawsuit against these people?
I don't think Woody's going to be bringing too many lawsuits against anyone, frankly.
Yes, the plot bears some striking similarities to a 1972 film written, but not directed, by Woody Allen, Play It Again, Sam. By 1972, Woody Allen had already begun to make a mark in the film industry through absurd gag farces like Take the Money and Run, Bananas, and Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Sex But Were Afraid to Ask, each for the most part starring himself. His more ambitious early work, starting with the splendid little science fiction movie called Sleeper, was still a year away, and his legitimizing seminal works like Annie Hall and Manhattan would not start to bow until the midpoint of the decade. Before he truly became a filmmaker with a narrative drive, his movies were essentially built around placing the stock Woody Allen type, neurotic, verbose, insecure, hopeless, more than a little annoying, in set pieces of increasingly awkward situations from which escape seems impossible. This is all a roundabout way of saying that in the first half of the 1970s, he had a clearly definable aesthetic, through which he was the central collaborator. It's through that context that Play It Again, Sam seems like a strange sidestep.
Oh, face it, Alan. You may be very sweet, but you're not sexy. You're awkward. You're clumsy. I can see how desperate you are. You can't stand the marriage. I don't find you any fun. I feel you suffocate me. I don't feel any rapport with you, and I don't think you physically. Oh, for God's sake, Alan, don't take it personal.
I have met a lot of dames, but you are really something special.
Really?
She bought it.
Herbert Ross, who went on to make The Sunshine Boys, The Goodbye Girl, Footloose, and the American adaptation of Dennis Potter's Pennies from Heaven, directed from a screenplay by Allen based on his 1969 Broadway play. It's a straightforward story about a writer named Alan Felix who was so entranced with Casablanca that the ghost of Humphrey Bogart sits on the sidelines of his subconscious and gives him encouragement and bad advice.
You know, I think if anybody ever tried to rape me, I'd just pretend to go along with it until the middle and then just grab hold of the nearest heavy object and let him have it. That is, unless, of course, I was enjoying it.
They say it's the secret desire of every woman.
I guess that depends on who's doing the raping.
Well, why dwell on morbid subjects? Odds are you'll never get raped.
No, not with my luck. Oh, I feel so light. That drink is going right to my head. I'm floating.
Go ahead, kiss her.
I can't.
She's ready.
How can you be sure?
Believe me, I'm sure.
If I pull back, I can feel it.
Look, she's sitting and waiting. Now, don't screw up.
All right, I'm gonna try, but I'm gonna go slow. If she screams, I'll pretend it was a joke.
Hurry up.
She better laugh.
What lovely and sparkling dialogue. It sure has aged particularly well. Alan's character spends the entire film in and out of unhealthy romantic relationships, one of which involves torpedoing his best friend's most stable coupling, pissing and moaning about his miserable lot in life, and finding different ways to blame the women who leave him for being myopic about his supposed qualities.
Bye.
So long. It was nice seeing you.
Thanks. You too.
That was real cool. Why not? She never understood me. I'm complicated.
I see no evidence to back up such an audacious claim. It's hard to understand, based purely on his words and deeds in this film, why he would be appealing to anyone. I can also say the same of his personal life, but that's not the endgame here. If you're trying to make me sympathize with someone's unsuccessful sex life, you honestly can't do much worse than Woody Allen. The cast is rounded out by Allen regulars Diane Keaton and Tony Roberts, both of whom inhabit the same basic archetypes that they would portray in later Allen films. Keaton is the impossibly self-aware manic pixie dream girl, who's both the quintessential Allen love interest and a parody of said love interest, and Roberts is the distinguished gentleman whose level of composure and decorum makes Woody's integral deficiencies all the more glaring, frequently scoring major deadpan one-liners.
How could they? My wife and my best friend. I loved her. I loved him. Why didn't I see it coming? Me, who had the foresight to buy Polaroid at 8.5.
But while I didn't have much use for this film, its influence is surprisingly potent, having inspired a major facet of the protagonist's thought process in Quentin Tarantino and Tony Scott's True Romance, with Val Kilmer as a never verbally identified Elvis Presley taking Bogart's place over 2 decades later. And although I only watched it for the first time recently and hadn't read much about it beforehand, I had a strong familiarity with this movie through my exposure to a parody sketch from the 3rd season of SCTV called Play It Again, Bob, which, in typical Second City television fashion, remixes the concept. Instead of a character, Woody Allen plays himself, as imitated by Rick Moranis, and instead of Casablanca, he's captivated by the film resume of Bob Hope, as imitated by head writer and fellow Mackenzie brother Dave Thomas.
Boy, there's a real pro for you. I mean, that delivery, that cavalier delivery, I mean, he just slays everybody with it. Ah! Oh, my leg. Wow, where was I?
It's 12 minutes of impeccably studied and constructed character work, evolving its premise at least 3 times. It begins as a what-if concept about Woody Allen trying to write a film for himself and Bob Hope to star in, but feeling unsure about his suitability for the material. The twist here being that while Allen's play and screenplay depict a long-dead mentor, at this time Bob Hope was very much alive, and he's not the devil on Woody Allen's shoulder. Instead, Moranis as Woody is bolstered by encouragement from Joe Flaherty as the ghost of the then recently deceased Bing Crosby.
It's not even my project. I can't go on with this.
You gotta watch out for that boy. He's like a runaway buckboard.
But you were with him from the beginning. I mean, you guys were pals. I just met him. I don't even think he likes me.
Oh, don't take him so seriously. He's just a softy at heart. Now, why don't you pick up that phone and give him a call?
Then, like the best SCTV meta pop culture roulette sketches, the writers are not content to simply carry that concept forward. Instead, Woody gets in Hope's good graces, only to discover that their personalities are not compatible in the slightest due to a generational gap and, well, anti-Semitism.
Wait a second, a delicatesse? Who said anything about a delicatesse? I said salad of fish.
Listen, I just thought maybe because you were Jewish, you'd want to hustle me off to some deli or
I
something.
knew there was an anti-Semitic remark in there somewhere. Come on, let's get it all out in the open right now. Come on.
Yeah, okay. I heard about your movies, and I heard your neurosis runs wild. Well, I don't want that kind of thing in any film that I'm going to be in.
What are you saying, that you're devoid of these hang-ups? That you live day to day with absolutely none of that at all? I mean, people don't buy that.
Yeah, well, I don't have people hitting on me because I'm short, Jewish, or neurotic. I'm a normal guy.
Normal guy? You have to fend off all kinds of liberals attacking you for your politics.
Hey, listen, that was just a bad decade. I'd like to forget about that.
Bad decade? I can't believe this. A bad decade. You believe what he's saying?
What are you doing? You talking to the camera?
I'm doing a voice
I know where the
thing.
camera is. It's right over there.
I'm doing a voice so I can pull it in.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. How you doing?
I can pull it in editing. It doesn't matter to me. I can do it
well,
now
not
or
without
later.
talking to my agent. You can't. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, I don't have an agent. I'm with William Morris.
That's it. Forget it. Stop the camera. I'm not doing this.
The sketch somehow uses Play It Again Sam's fourth wall breaking as a way to satirize old Hollywood prejudice, Bob Hope's stage patter, and Woody Allen's self-indulgent tendencies for introspection all at the same time. The eye for detail is unequaled, the three-act structure endlessly impressive. Characters have entire arcs over the course of 4 total scenes, and it has far more on its mind than the subject it's parodying. And seeing it again with a more informed mind retrospectively made the time I spent watching the actual film more useful. There is much more that I have to say about SCTV, but we'll save that material for a more relevant time. Spoiler alert, it's season 3 or 4 of this podcast. The Overdrawn at the Memory Bank episode is one of the standouts of the season, which makes for a fitting finale. It does away with the arc-based storytelling that had permeated the previous 21 episodes, inspired by the public television financing of the experiment, resulting in a self-contained story reminiscent of the best of Season 6. Though The Satellite of Love and The Widowmaker are presumably still wormhole hopping, the first segment opens with Pearl on a telethon set that Brain Guy supposedly manifested, though this is never elaborated upon, shilling for Public Pearl Television, or PPTV. The set is bare and simple, just some tables with mostly unattended phone banks, Ortega seems to be the only volunteer, a modest sign, a backdrop of curtains, and some columns reused from the previous Ancient Rome arc, spray-painted gold. Fun fact, the telethon theme song may sound familiar because it's also the theme of the Mystery Science Theater Hour, which we discussed in a deleted scene last year.
Stand by.
Clearly, the writers spent countless hours watching PBS fundraisers because everything about the setup is note perfect, from the sedate tone of the proceedings to Pearl's visible reticence at having to beg for money in person when she could easily have someone else do it for her. It's a perfect showcase for the ever-versatile Mary Jo Pehl.
Hey, Nell Bell, I just remembered how much squats public television pulls down, so I had Brainball whip me up this set, and Viola, it's pledge drive time. From now on, I'm playing the ponies on some well-meaning liberals coin. Ka-ching! Let's go talk to one of our great volunteers. Hi, what's your name? Ortega? That's pretty. What's your favorite show here on Public Pearl? Oh, sure, I love that show. Jeremy Brett is one of the best. Thanks for helping out. Now, remember, folks, if you pledge at the $150 golden producer level, you'll receive this sturdy tote bag, emblazoned over its entire surface with the color brown. Give a call, won't you?
I would mention that we've entered a new phase in fandom history in which I pledged for and received a tote bag emblazoned with the new MST3K Moon logo, and then cracked some wry, ironic, and cynical joke about franchise culture, but I'm not here to court controversy. I am implying all of that, though. Bill Corbett later explained the impetus for taking public television down a peg or two. Quote, "The sketches were inspired by the weird and disturbing fact that this movie was partially bankrolled by a New York PBS affiliate, WNET. It's in the credits. Look, they can't deny it. Think about that next time your local public television station fires up Riverdance again and tries to guilt trip you into cutting them a big check." End quote. Later in the episode, we get a Pledge Week preview of an upcoming TV special, Pearl, 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 That's Drowning and Dissolves, itself a great little meta touch that anyone with significant exposure to cheesy musical performance editing will be familiar with. Think Midnight Special, if you're old enough to know what the hell I'm talking about.
Soft and precious love, it's love. A lovely love is all we seem to need when we're in loving love. But then it's gone. It is nothing but a memory.
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 And then it's back, and loving lovers love again.
Who knows where it flies?
The lustrous love must rise
Into the endless skies.
A new day shining bright,
Your heart has wings to fly.
and no one else can.
In 2016, during the Riff Tracks Live MST3K reunion show, Mary Jo and Bill reminisced about their favorite moments on the show, and it was not surprising to learn that this song was a highlight. But it was a surprise to learn how it made a comeback at a key point in Bill's life.
Mary Jo, how about yourself?
Well, I just, I love When Loving Lovers Love that you and I did.
Yeah.
That's maybe the one sketch I can stand to watch of myself, and when he comes out stage with that smarmy look, it just makes me very happy.
Thank you, Paul Anka, for the inspiration. Yeah, and before our wedding, friends of ours threw us, my wife in Virginia and I had a little...
Not ours.
Not everybody's married up here.
What?
We're gonna riff this.
I've got news, honey.
Virginia?
We're eloping after the show.
Ron,
Oh, boy.
I'm sorry.
We had a little party with a little wedding cabaret. It was a surprise party, and friends of ours put up When Loving Lovers Love as part of the entertainment. And my new in-laws were looking at it like, holy God, what is this thing marrying into our family? White-faced goon. But eventually they will come to accept me.
That's
I think.
right. Eventually.
Not tonight, though.
And there are even great host segments that don't involve Pearl, which I acknowledge sounds absurd. In the prologue, Crow has apparently manufactured a catchphrase with a very limited shelf life, and he'll be damned if he doesn't get every ounce out of it.
You know you want me, baby. Hit it, Servo. Yeah, come on, Mike. Don't act like you haven't heard my trademark catchphrase, loved by millions. You know you want me, baby.
It's new to me.
Oh, don't play coy. People everywhere stand around water coolers, chuckling over my hijinks from the night before, especially when I roll out my lovable chestnut. You know you want me, baby.
You know what? I have never heard that before in my entire life.
Oh, sure you have. I say it all the time, Mike. I'm a cultural icon, bigger than that Ray J. Johnson guy in his prime.
Yeah.
America, you know you want me, baby.
Don't you feel the slightest bit bad about just pulling a catchphrase out of thin air?
This was embraced by the people, Mike. It didn't come from me.
Yes, it did.
Well, all right. Well, that may be true, but I have to justify this huge T-shirt order. I mean, look at this stuff.
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
Later, Servo subjects himself to the doppling process, transmitting his mind into a microscopic nanite body with the intention of harassing the tiniest inhabitants of the ship. But he didn't sufficiently think about the scale factor, which leads him into some serious trouble with the more antisocial members of Nanite society.
Hey, nanites! Hey, little pipsqueaks, a giant walks among you.
Ooh, looks like I landed in a rough part of town here. Hey, hello! Where are those little idiots anyway?
Well, what do we have here, Mookie? I don't know, Slicer. Looks like a college boy to me.
Hi, fellas.
So, Mookie, then I just hear this punk calling me a idiot?
Oh, no, not you. No.
Well, so what? You calling me an idiot then? A college boy?
Excuse me a second. Mike, you didn't have to synth me down quite so small.
Nah.
I'm sorry, Tom. It's out of my control.
What's up, Mike?
Oh, Servo's syntho doppel thing is down in the nanite world.
Huh. Come around dissing our neighborhood, Mr. College? No. You know you're gonna take a beating. Hold him, Slicer.
Oh, boy, help. Oh, come on, guys. I've never even been to college. Please help me.
Wow. The episode, and therefore the season, concludes on an irreverent note as Pearl is caught counting her proceeds from the ill-intentioned telethon on camera, which she doesn't even bother to deny or downplay.
Yeah. Look, Servo, we're out of tote bags. Yes, I'm sure. Well, okay, for a $25,000 pledge, you can get an ashtray for your premium. Payment plan? Yeah, you send me a cashier's check for the whole amount. No, thank you, Servo. Public Pearl, because, where the hell else are you gonna see public television crap, huh? That's right, nowhere else but public television. So come on, pay up, freeloaders, keep the money coming. And remember, cash money. Oh yeah. Always grease your phone bank. Here you go, Ortega, buy yourself some Irish Spring, huh?
And that is where we end this chapter of the Coolness Chronicles. If you're a fan of the show, check out my journals about the 2020 project, A Year of Cinematic Discovery, on Tumblr. The link can be found in the episode description. Exclusively at patreon.com/coolnesschronicles, $5 gets you access to not just hours of bonus content, like all the Ghosts of the Movies installments, but monthly spin-offs from the free episodes, and every episode is posted early. Your patronage helps keep this show, the one you're listening to right now, survive. Check it out today. And now, a special announcement for everyone who sticks around through these episodes. We are returning to our weekly format, so no more 2-week breaks. Episodes will be a little shorter, but more frequent, keeping you company in this weird new age. We start a new season of MST3K and a new chapter with the discovery of Castle Forrester, learn the downsides of projection-based teleportation, but most importantly, we'll finally realize that the wisest and the best is to focus our attention on the good and the beautiful. All that and much, much more as we continue to chart the history and legacy of Mystery Science Theater 3000. But before we take off for the week, it's another little burst of cinematic discovery fresh from the annals of the 2020 project. It's Ryan's recommendations. A couple of months ago, one of the first recommendations we discussed was 2013's pitch-black horror comedy Big Bad Wolves, the Blu-ray box for which boasted Quentin Tarantino's declaration that it was the best film of that year. Well, this week, we'll briefly touch upon the movie that earned a similar honor for being his favorite film of 2019, Crawl.
Due to extreme weather, many species of animals are on the lookout for new hunting grounds. When we are no longer safe in our homes, will we have what it takes to survive?
Crawl, rated R tomorrow.
When I first saw the trailer that I just played in early 2019, I dismissed the movie as minor cheese. A woman getting trapped in a flooded basement with a couple alligators doesn't necessarily set my art radar off, and having Sam Raimi as a producer is a crapshoot in terms of signifying quality. Sometimes you get Don't Breathe, the positive column, but often you get Rise Blood Hunter or the Poltergeist remake, the negative column. But somehow I don't have the same rigid taste or smug snootiness I possessed merely a year ago. It's been a whirlwind upward slope, which is not an unfamiliar sensation for a bipolar boy. Shortly after the start of the new year, I read Tarantino's praise, took it more as an opportunity than something to shun, and loaded up Crawl on my Apple TV. By the end of the credits, the cynicism that drips from my every pore subsided. By the halfway point, I was genuinely invested in the sheer craft involved, the efficiency of its breakneck pace, the relatability of its characters. The alligators that seemed uncanny valley-ish in the trailer were some of my favorite elements, looking as though they were primarily executed practically with occasional enhancements. In a crowded field of computer-generated overkill that has been strangling creative visuals for what feels like decades at this point, it was very refreshing. And bonus points for making Serbia look convincingly like Florida. There's a mean, ironic joke to be made in there somewhere. I learned something with this film. Ignore the trailer, ignore the poster, ignore gut instincts. Embrace genre. Give everything a fair shake, well, mostly. Movies at their most fun genuinely surprise you, and this is one of those movies. Thank you to everyone involved in making MST3K for everything they've contributed to my life and to culture as a whole. Double thanks for writing the episode guides that I will quote frequently in this season of the pod. I also want to thank Shout Factory for their excellent supplemental material that was invaluable to my research for this and every episode to follow on this subject. If you want to support the artists who made this wonderful show, many episodes are available on VOD at rifftracks.com. And thank you for listening. If you enjoy what you hear, please rate and review the show on iTunes or your chosen source, and share it with anyone you can, any way you can. This has been the largest and most fulfilling endeavor I've ever seen to completion, and would be nice to keep making the show until it just isn't fun anymore. Have any questions or comments, or is there anything I missed in this particular chapter? Contact me on Twitter at CoolnessPodRyan or on our Facebook page, and keep on the lookout for updates. Special thanks to our amazing patrons Bill M., Christopher H., Christopher J., Tracy R., Zach F., and Jenny R. Until next time, do what you love, don't be a dick, and, as always...
Mommy!
Darn, that's the end.